Hello dear seekers of truth and light. This video is entitled John Newbrough, the False Prophet, April to June 1883, Racist Adulterer. These are harsh words, but the truth is the truth. And this cannot be called an attempt to vilify John Newbrough. You cannot vilify someone who is a villain already. Calling these videos a vilification is simply an admission that you have not considered the evidence, because there are so many points, so many examples where Newbrough was a villain. Having an affair with a woman 32 younger than yourself is being a villain. Lying to her and not telling her the truth about it for over a year is being a villain. Taking money from your followers and not giving it back, taking their land, those are all the acts of villainy. Declaring yourself to be infallible, that's being a villain. Exhibiting racism, that's being a villain. So please consider the evidence and know that Oahspe is an anti-cult book because it teaches people to free themselves from all priests and strict dogma where one is required to obey and not to follow one's inner light and not to communicate with the Creator. That's what Oahspe was created. That's why it was channeled. Newbrough did the opposite. He created a Masonic style form of false god worship, and because he did that, and because of other crazy things Oahspe never really became popular and that could not fulfill its destiny. We need to change that. We need a free and clean Oahspe. April 1883, Newbrough starts a romantic affair with sexual relations with his dental assistant, one Frances Vandewater Sweet. They would have a baby together, born out of wedlock on January 1st, 1884. And again, he paid for a separate apartment for her. And this was an expensive apartment, and his wife, Rachel Turnbull, complained about it. And because she complained about him footing the bill for a mistress, he later on, when he finally proceeded with divorce legal proceedings several years later, he publicly condemned her for criticizing him for charity. In what world is paying money to rent an apartment for your mistress? In what world, how can that be considered charity? Certainly Miss Turnbull was in her full right to condemn him using their money to pay for a mistress for a place to live where he could meet her whenever he wanted to. Again, these are not the actions of a man who's a prophet, a leader of the faithist movement. These are the actions of a villain, someone who has no idea what true spirituality is. And everyone has to take a look at the evidence and realize that Oahspe is better without him. And Newbrough went on to his next group to disappoint. At each stage of his life, if you've been watching these videos, he's basically been in failures. Nothing's ever changed, and it never did change. This is just the next failure. It's because he's a con man. He's not spiritual at all. This time it's with Miss Elizabeth Thompson and Dr. B.L. Selensky. And they said that it would be very cool to have kindergarten schools, homes for the orphans, and it's a great idea where they would teach spiritual ideas to the children, teach them how to develop their spiritual powers, and help them develop trades so that when they old enough they could hold jobs and have a living where they could support themselves. Very noble endeavor. It never got off the ground, and The reason was initially because Newbrough had offended so many people with his anti-spiritualism monologues, which were published in the newspapers, with his crazy Egyptian rites, which had nothing to do with Oahspe. It's just his Masonic background, taking over his free will and altering Oahspe against its basic principles. Anyway, there would be another conflict between Selinsky and with Ms. Thompson later. A lot of it would go into the newspapers, and so they never got off the ground. There was a book, of course, called Kindergarten Homes, which Newbrough lied that Thompson wrote it, but he wrote it. The reason being that his reputation was so damaged, he had no choice but to hope that Ms. Thompson could carry the day. It was a plea for rich people to help them finance these kindergarten homes, and when your reputation is damaged, no one comes forth. But Ms. Thompson decided that she would help in this way, at least. If we couldn't have the kindergarten homes, she would open her farm and let Mr. Newbrough bring the few children he had, about 4 babies, and the few followers he had not yet alienated, and he had alienated a lot. Instead of hundreds of followers, he had, like a handful now by this time. And so anyway, they would go and live starting June 2nd, 1883, at her farm. And this is another attempt by Newbrough to establish Jehovah's Kingdom on earth. There was a promise made by Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, which was, if you can just get this going reasonably well, we'll deed the land. You can own this land. We'll transfer ownership to you, but you have to be able to do this for 2 years. Prove to us that you're capable of handling this responsibility and not to go, not to mess it up. Of course, Newbrough immediately did things which would mess it up, and I'll be talking about that in this video. And he'll blame them. He'll always blame people for his own problems, for his own mistakes. He never did anything wrong. In fact, Newbrough has called himself infallible publicly. And I'll get to that point. It's not a good sign. When you say you're infallible, you are probably a scoundrel. I shouldn't say probably, you are a scoundrel. Only Creator is perfect. So Newbrough couldn't wait to publish in the newspapers that now he had this very valuable farm, $30,000 farm in 1883. But probably nowadays, I don't know what that would be if you adjust it for inflation. It's probably $2 or $3 million. However, the Thompsons would read about this and say, what the heck? We made the condition contingent upon you being able to run the farm for 2 years, to raise the children for 2 years without any, controversies, and, doing something productive with your volunteer work here. But he immediately opens his big mouth in the newspaper and says, I own this land, and I want everyone to join me. He was trying to drum up support. He thought it was a great sign of achievement. He was probably feeling very ashamed and embarrassed by all the crazy, stupid things he did in the public before. And he was trying to kind of erase those mistakes, or at least smooth them over, by saying, hey, I can be successful and cool. I've got this big farm now. The only problem is it was a lie, just another lie. This man lies. His whole life is a lie. I mean, he left his wife with this mistress. He didn't tell his wife, I've got a mistress. This went on for over a year. She didn't find out until the baby was born, after the baby was born, that he had betrayed her. So every day he would go home, you go back and forth between his mistress, Miss Sweet, and his wife, and he would lie because he wouldn't tell her the truth. And here he is lying again in public about the farm. And of course, Miss Thompson would be very upset by this, to know that their farm was no longer owned publicly, according to Newbrough. Well, it didn't take long for Newbrough to have another controversy. The man just couldn't stop doing stupid things, doing ignorant things. June 14th, Newbrough dismisses servants, fires them, 2 faithful workers. He wrote about this to Mr. Bates. He says, the servants were both ugly, and I had to discharge them. Yes, if you're ugly, that's a reason to get rid of people. If you want my honest opinion, I think ugly is simply code for being non-white, for being African Americans. As a Mason, especially one who's gone to the very highest levels, this is how they roll. Segregation is important to maintain, and so they were dismissed. If I sound like I'm angry about it, I am. I mean, this is terrible. I mean, any one of these actions, whether it was committing adultery, dismissing people because they're ugly or because they're African Americans, these are not the actions of a new age movement, especially one that is of Oahspe. And I care about this book so much. There's so much wisdom and goodness in it that a lot of people have said, well, I'm going to overlook everything and I'm going to close my ears, close my eyes to anything that would ever cast a shadow of doubt about the way Newbrough handled the Oahspe movement that he started from the publication. And that's not the right approach. We have to, face this and say, Oahspe's better off with this sham artist. Oahspe better without his false words. We need to start anew, and it can be done. It should be done. Let's do that. That's why I'm making these videos, because I want to set the record straight about everything. Okay, another bad move. Newbrough brought in Walter Lockwood to be editor of Oahspe, and 2 of a kind, I guess. They're both terrible people in different ways, or maybe not. But anyway, Lockwood would eventually go to California, where he'd be arrested and imprisoned for raping children and women. At least one of them committed suicide. A lot of them ran away. And the police would catch them and no one would believe the children. They would just send them back. And they were starving the children too, on vegetarian diets or very little food. But anyway, that's another story for another time. But at this point in his life, Lockwood was on the Thompson farm, and he was basically, this is just a few days, it's less than 2 weeks in since they started living there, and the Tom said, okay, that's enough, all the men get out of here. Why? Because they were sexually harassing the women there. And Newbrough tried to disingenuously confuse the matter by saying, what? They're crazy. They're just telling men to go away. How can I have a farm without men? He won't tell you that Lockwood was basically a rapist or a molester or that. He won't say that. That's the truth. Instead, it's just that the Thompsons are crazy. Somehow they're going to tell they don't want any men. So anyway, Lockwood would go on to California, and Newbrough always spoke highly of him. And he shouldn't have. At least he spoke highly of him until Shalom started. Then I think he might have found out what was going on and basically kept mum about it all. So this is just Newbrough, great psychic, huh? He doesn't even know what kind of person Lockwood is. Well, birds of a feather. Okay, so he writes on June 25th. This is about the 3rd week since they've been there, and he sends another letter to Mr. Bates. Our babes at the home are in excellent health. I always felt like he cared about the children. I'm sorry to say something good about him, but I have read a lot of his writings from The Castaway, a pamphlet that he used to publish from New Orleans, and I always got the feeling he did care about children. No one's wholly evil, and I don't believe he was wholly evil, but he certainly was at least partially evil. I mean, if you're going to commit adultery, if you're going to be racist, if you're going to steal people's money, if you're going to lie about things to your followers, then yeah, you're evil. But I think there was a part of him that really did care about the children, wanted them to be happy. He wanted the homeless children, the orphans, to have a good home. Of course, On the other hand, all these babies, Newbrough sent them away. He took them in and said, well, you know, it's not convenient for me to have them anymore. So I'm just not going to raise them anymore. See ya. And he looked, I mean, he found other homes for them. He just didn't dump them on the street or anything. But still, I mean, if you accept, in my opinion, if you want to be a parent, you accept children, you don't say, well, now it's not convenient, I better get rid of them. But he did that. And he does what's expedient for himself. Like I said, no one's totally evil. He wanted these children to be happy and have homes, but he wasn't very smart and he wasn't very good at heart, because all those babies never, even though he took them up and took care of them for months, he wouldn't keep them when they left the farm. He said, well, I'm just going to get rid of all the children, start again. So that's today's video, and again, it's unfortunate. Again, all these things happen, and it makes Oahspe look worse. He was the all-time worst person to have led this movement, and his followers covered his tracks. They don't want stuff like this ever to be known, even though it's the truth, even though it's what's happened. There's all these excuses about why this happened and why that happened. They don't even know about the Thompson farm. And he was on another community too that failed before that, which I've already talked about. It just keeps going on, and he's just this, the saint of, call him Saint John of Oahspe, but he's no saint at all. So I don't expect people from such as the UFK to ever change their mind. They've been brainwashed, and they can't think clearly about any of this. And it seems like I'm angry. It's because I value Oahspe so much that anyone who disgraces it, especially when this book could do even more good around the world if people weren't shunning it because it's full of unsavory, gory, strange, cultish behavior in the book of Safaf, and anti-African American, anti-colored people information in the books of Lords. This is all ridiculous. We need to get rid of it so Oahspe, all the great information that's in it, needs to be shared around the world. That's why I'm angry, because it's so frustrating to see this happening. And yet everyone just walks around on eggshells because they'd be afraid to offend Newbrough. And they want to protect his reputation. Oahspe needs to rid himself. The Oahspe movement needs to rid itself of this. May the Creator bless you always. Thank you for listening. Hello, dear seekers of truth and light. This video is entitled John Newbrough,